The portal was tough sledding for Carolina last offseason. We all know it. They've got to get what they need this time around.
This is Tyler Hansbrough, and you're listening to Locked On Tar Heels.
You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? It's Thursday, March 6, 2025. Welcome into the Locked On Tar Heels podcast, the only daily North Carolina show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Shade. You're joining me at the place to get your Tar Heels content every single day. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks so much for making us your first listener watch of the day to get your Thursday going the right way. Special shout out to all you everydayers, all the members of the Locked On Tar Heels Discord, and our great Locked On Tar Heels insiders. This episode is brought to you by Nissan. Today's episode brought to you by the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Stay with us for the Armada Team of the Week later in this episode. Hey, it is a 2-episode Thursday, bonus episodes all over the place this week. I'm just out here trying to give you as much content as possible. Yesterday, hopefully you caught our conversation with Matt Norlander from CBS Sports in addition to the other episodes. Today, we've got a normal episode, Coach Pat Kilby and myself together. But on this episode, I am joined by Joe Tipton, Tipton Edits, who does all sorts of recruiting stuff. He wrote an article earlier this week that we want to talk about. And so we're going to get it right into that. Here's our conversation with Joe Tipton. It's great to be joined today on Locked On Tar Heels by our guy, Joe Tipton. You probably know him from all his edits, more so than his face, but here he is in the flesh. Tipton Edits also does great recruiting work with On3. Make sure you check that out. One of the biggest 4 main recruiting sites that we utilize out there in college basketball. But I'm going to tell you, it's the place I go first, so go check out On3 all the time. Joe, it's great to have you with us, man. There is obviously still plenty of season to be finished with Carolina smack dab right now in the middle of the bubble, but it's never too early to get a little bit of a look ahead. And to that point, let's go to you for recruiting because you are the guy that recruits are coming to. You wrote an article for On3 earlier this week, just entitled Needs North Carolina Has to Address in the Transfer Portal to Return to National Prominence. What's interesting to me about that, Joe, is there's multiple things to that. Obviously, we got to address the transfer portal. That was a big issue for Carolina last summer. But something that actually occurs to me in real time as I ask that question is that last phrase, return to national prominence. I didn't even prep you for this one. It's hitting me in real time. Is there a perception amongst recruits that Carolina is not nationally prominent now?
I think that's a good question. I think the brand of North Carolina is still strong. Obviously we know they went to the national title game just a couple of years ago, right? Then, missed the tournament, make the Sweet 16 last year. Right now they're on the bubble again this year. I think in the recruit's mind, they still think of North Carolina and it's like still an honor to receive an offer from that school. It's a blue blood, right? Like there's still an awesome appeal to North Carolina basketball. I just think for North Carolina to recruit at an extremely high level year in and year out, that they have to be, frankly, like winning more games, not be on the bubble with the NCAA tournament, right? And I'm sure we'll talk about some of the recruits,
Sure.
They landed, namely, 5-star Caleb Wilson a little bit later in this show. But even in this 2025 recruiting class, there was quite a few guys that they did miss on. And they did, still end up landing Wilson, Derek Dixon, Isaiah Denis, 2 4-star top 50 to 75-ish guys, which is a decent class. But you would probably have preferred to have, a 5-star center or, a 5-star point guard or something along those lines. But I national prominence, I still think, North Carolina or recruits still look to North Carolina as being a premier brand in college sports.
And I think that's a good thing for Carolina folks to know, right? I think there's this fear that it's like because Duke's always getting it and all these other things that I think there is this thing of like, crud. Are we falling into that UCLA or Indiana thing where it's like, we think we're a blue blood, but we're not still a blue blood and recruits don't want to, that whole thing. And so I think that's just good for people to hear from outside the Carolina bubble, Joe. So thanks so much for that. Now let's get into why we're here. The portal needs you so well. I love the word you used in your article. It's been a roller coaster tenure for Hubert Davis in the first 4 years. National championship game, as you talked about, a 1 seed last year, missing the tournament in between, maybe going to miss the tournament again this year. That said, pulling from your article, what in your mind are the biggest portal needs that Carolina has to address this offseason?
I think the answer is twofold, and I'm not sure which one is more important. I'm sure fans could debate all day long, but like,
they do.
Oh, I'm sure. And I think the biggest thing heading into this season that was incredibly glaring was the lack of a front court presence, like an elite front court presence, right? We saw, like, diehard North Carolina fans saw like who they were in the portal, right? All the bigs that they were after, that they were recruiting, right? And they missed on basically all of them. And, with all due respect to Vin Allen Lubin
Yes.
and Ty Claude, right? Like, in a perfect world, that is a backup center for North Carolina, or even a backup to the backup, right? So I think the biggest thing North Carolina might need is just an elite forward, elite center. Obviously, we got Caleb Wilson coming in. He's more of a 4-3, right? He can play on the wing. He can play on the block, both of those. But just a guy that's going to battle on the boards, rebound, right? Like, we saw Armando Bacot for 5 years in Chapel Hill absolutely dominate, right? And they missed him so much, it's not even funny. So I think that's the main priority as you go after, you spend massive money, like $1 million+ on just an elite big or maybe two of them, to go along with Caleb Wilson. Just some experience, right? And then I think, you're losing RJ Davis. So, yes, we could see a guy like Seth Trimble step up big, or Elliot Cadeau is a great playmaker and a passer, right? But to replace RJ Davis's scoring is going to be a great undertaking because, frankly, like we mentioned, two other guards coming in, freshmen, Derek Dixon and Isaiah Denis, if they're relied on heavily, that's a lot of pressure coming in for a first-year college player. So I think they're going to just go after, it's hard to replace an All-American caliber player like RJ Davis. Like we saw, they weren't able to do it for Armando Bacot. And it's not going to be easy to get an RJ Davis replacement, but I think they're going to have to do their darndest to try.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Joe, because obviously this team in 2024-25 has had a completely new identity without Armando Bacot. The same will be true without RJ Davis next year, but now it will be both of them, both those bookends, as you talk about, with the center and the point guard or the shooting guard in RJ's case. And so there's a lot that has to happen there. Do last summer's misses affect this summer's transfer portal at all? Or is that just a matter of you just got to put more money in the coffer and go out and buy dudes?
That's a great question. And I think it wasn't for lack of trying this offseason, for what it's worth. I think a lot of it, I don't even want to make excuses, but I think a lot of it was bad luck, or just other schools. Like North Carolina was probably desperate last year going into the portal for a big specifically. And obviously they didn't end up with one that you would preferably want. And that's all with all due respect to their bigs now.
Sure, absolutely.
But I think this year, now more than ever, especially with the addition of GM Jim Tanner, it's going to be their number one priority. They will die on that sword to get an elite big man, right? Yeah. They're really going to have to. So I don't think it's going to they're going in with their heads held low. I think it's quite the opposite of all right, we understand we missed last year in the portal when it comes to bigs. They didn't really need any guards. Their guards are, RJ Davis was coming back. We had Ian Jackson, Drake Powell, right? We knew Seth Trimble, he pulled his name out of the portal and came back, right? And of course, Elliot Cadeau as well. So we just needed the bigs, and obviously they struck out. And Cade Tyson, was a missed evaluation on that part. And, he had some high expectations coming in and hasn't really been able to live up to it. But with all that being said, I don't anticipate them having an issue this go around when it comes to finding a big, just with the addition of Jim Tanner, the GM. And I think, with revenue sharing coming right, I think the donors and the collective are going to have to step up because they don't want to see this happen again. And, obviously they extended Hubert Davis, which is a positive sign, right? They're investing in Jim Tanner, paying him a salary of $1 million a year. Right. So I think that they're going to be able to get a quality big man, and then obviously prioritizing an RJ Davis replacement if that's not a 1-for-1 replacement, right? But like somebody that can come in and like give you buckets immediately.
And maybe be about 3 or 4 inches taller. I think that could probably be a helpful thing, Joe. But yes, to your point, it's not every day you can replace the ACC's all-time third leading scorer. That's just not out there. But can you find some way to do it in any sort of way that helps out? Now, Joe, we've mentioned the names of Carolina's incoming 25 high school recruits already on the show. There's a conversation about, we've talked about the unknown additions from the transfer portal, but there are 3 new additions that the Tar Heels are already aware of. What are these guys going to bring to Carolina? Is Caleb Wilson going to be that dude? We'll talk about that and more in just a second. Right after I tell you about Nissan. The Armada Team of the Week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Each week, our Locked On College basketball experts, that's me, are picking one team that stands apart. From top-seeded stars to the unexpected upsets, these guys showcase the strength and sheer power needed to push their team forward. This week's Armada and clear-cut Team of the Week are the Houston Cougars. Since joining the Big 12 last season, the Cougars have gone a combined 33-4 in conference games, winning the regular season title by multiple games in both years. There is no team in college basketball that more capably embodies the rugged Armada than Kelvin Sampson's squad. Houston's tenacious defense leads the nation in fewest points allowed per game for the second straight season. When it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer, and that's exactly what the Houston Cougars have done. It's clear that our Team of the Week is out here ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all-new Nissan Armada or any of Nissan's outstanding vehicles. So take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. Joe, we know there are at least 3 Tar Heels that got to leave because they ain't got no more eligibility left. That's RJ Davis. That's Ty Claude, backup big man you talked about earlier, and Jalen Withers, who has just found himself all of a sudden lately. It's crazy. But those 3 dudes are definitely out the door. There's some others that probably will, either through the portal or, Ian Jackson probably off to the NBA, etc. Carolina obviously has to replace a lot of that. And they had Isaiah Denis and Derek Dixon already locked in, the 2 4-star guards that you talked about. Hubert Davis had just gone scattershot amongst the 5-star guys and hadn't landed any of them. And it all came down to Caleb Wilson, the last one they had. We had about a 2 a.m. Eastern time, if I remember correctly, announcement that was, I'm curious your thought on that here in a second, actually, by the way. But thankfully, Carolina does land Caleb Wilson, their highest ranked recruit in this class. Mm-hmm. Is he ready to go right out of the gate? Is he a plug and play guy for Carolina next season? What can the Tar Heel fans expect?
Oh yeah, no, he's without a doubt. Plug and play. I don't think he is the type of guy that's gonna you're gonna put the ball in his hands and rely on him in a massive way. I think in an ideal world, you pair him with some scoring guards, right? That he can be a complementary player and play a specific role, be, an incredibly versatile, athletic, 4'3", like I mentioned before. I think he's pushing 6'9". He's a great athlete. He can stretch it. He can defend at a really high level. And I think it just comes his main selling point, at least for me, in regards to Carolina next year, is just his overall versatility and what he can give you in different looks. Right. But yeah, he's going to be an immediate starter, an immediate contributor, and he'll be a big time player for North Carolina next year.
And the Tar Heels have seen a very versatile freshman in that way this year with Drake Powell. And so it's not 1-for-1. It's not identical, but some of that same versatility. Joe, I do want to ask you about that late night announcement, right? In an era where we're all trying to think about brand building and getting your name out there, obviously it was massive to be able to do that on Inside the NBA with those guys and have, a Tar Heel great, Kenny the Jet, alongside of him. But is that a missed opportunity for a young man trying to build his brand to do that so late at night, in your opinion?
Yeah, so it's funny because I was speaking with Caleb prior to his announcement on NBA on TNT or Inside the NBA, whichever one it is. And it originally was going to be at halftime of the 7 p.m. game. And I can't remember who was going to play. I think it was the Thunder or something. So it was going to be 7 p.m. So then it got pushed back to, I think, the 9 p.m. start time, the Lakers game, right, which is on Pacific time. So it originally wasn't going to be that late, but I think he had already agreed to announce it on their platform, and there was nothing that he could personally do about like the late start time or it being delayed or pushed back to the next game. But to answer your question, I do really wish he would have, like maybe just, obviously we don't want to like postpone it if we don't have like it to another day or to a different game like the following day, right? But
Yeah.
I think it was during like a weeknight as well. Like I don't
Yeah,
even
it
think
was.
yeah. So I mean, and obviously we're operating, especially North Carolina fans are operating on Eastern time. So like if we were like out, on the West Coast, it'd have been a different story maybe. But yeah, I mean, I do think it definitely helps that like, well, not all North Carolina fans are willing to stay up that late, but those that maybe didn't have to wake up at the crack of dawn could still watch it just because he's such a sizable commitment. I mean, a 5-star recruit for North Carolina. But I do think it would have been smarter to, maybe just push it back to a different day just because the announcement was just so late at night,
Yeah. It was still a very cool, very special moment. Neat to have family and friends there in the audience watching. But that's great to know that behind the scenes, that it was actually just a programmatic thing of just getting pushed back on that. Really excited for Caleb to be a Tar Heel next year. I know a lot of people are pumped about it, but he's not the only player coming in this class. Joe, Isaiah Denis, Derek Dixon, 2 guards coming in, both bigger guards. Carolina has been saddled with the shortness of Elliot, Cadeau, and RJ Davis the past couple of years. What do you look for these guys to bring to the table, and can Tar Heel fans expect them to contribute in meaningful ways in year one, or will they need to wait till their sophomore years?
Yeah, Isaiah Denis, he's originally from North Carolina. He's a scoring guard. Some people call him a point guard, some call him a combo guard, but he's about 6'5". He loves to get downhill. He's got some wiggle. He's a good athlete, bouncy. He can also shoot, the three, and can also facilitate as well. But he really does like to have the ball in his hands. And then Derek Dixon, he's about 6'3" combo guard. He's not gonna blow you away with his speed or his athleticism, but he's really fundamental. He's got a good build. He's got good feel for the game. He's a guy that you imagine being in your program for all 4 years. And he can also be a real threat from deep, especially, with his feet set. He also likes his mid-range as well, and can be a playmaker and can really pass. I think you would like to see Isaiah Denis and Derek Dixon play maybe 10, 12, 15 minutes a game. I think depending on, what Ian Jackson does, what Drake Powell does, like, right, both guys are like projected to be drafted, like 31 to 34, maybe a little bit higher, right? I think Ian Jackson probably just stays in the draft, but, North Carolina makes him an offer he can't refuse. He can come back and be the star of the program, right? That pitch. Boost your NBA draft stock to maybe, push for a lottery, which he was kind of expected coming into this season, right? Anything can happen. I'm not ruling it out, especially in the age of NIL, and North Carolina should have it in order to kind of pay those guys what they need, especially guys that they want to keep. So I think Isaiah Denis and Derek Dixon are just a kind of, pair of guys that you don't want to rely on incredibly heavily for their freshman year, but guys you want to count on kind of for their future, for their sophomore and junior years, once they develop a little bit more.
Joe, I want to talk some roster construction in the next segment, but it does, talking about Dixon and Denis, does bring up a great question of, you called them 50 to 75-ish guys. And that's the exact range I want to ask about in this era where most of the guys that are 5 stars that live up to those expectations are off to the draft every year. This is an era where a lot of guys that maybe just fall outside of that range might be gone and out because they have bigger expectations if they're not getting those in year one. Is there something to be said for maybe targeting some of these guys in this Denis and Dixon range that might be 4-3-year guys that stick around and realize like, hey, yeah, I'm not going to play a ton in year one, but there is opportunity for development for me. Is there something to that in this era where dudes are just out the door?
Yeah, definitely. I think there needs to be a healthy mix of which players you recruit, how many high schoolers you take. Like we've seen some programs recruit, only the portal, like not really any high school guys. We've seen some programs only recruit really high school guys and high level high school guys. So I think if you're like in North Carolina's shoes, or maybe just any program, like if I'm the head coach of a school, then like I would want maybe one, like a guy like Caleb Wilson, like a 5-star freshman, right? That's probably going to be off to the draft, or even a guy like Ian Jackson and Drake Powell, the year prior when they came in. So you want pros to come in because that's a great recruiting pitch. Future pros can help you in your program now. There's, they got to, a lot of them need time to kind of get their sea legs right. And we've seen that, with freshmen across the country. But you also want 4-year players. And it's hard to, frankly, know who is going to be a 4-year player now because so many players transfer. Yeah. And it's hard to have that guarantee because there's, nothing, there's not a year that players have to sit out anymore, right? You can just leave and, play right away, especially if you're dissatisfied. So I think you need to recruit the right kind of player, and the honesty that I think Hubert Davis gives his guys, especially now more than ever with the portal just kind of always lurking over every player on the roster's shoulder, right? That just every player that comes into the program, they have, expectations, or, I don't want to say limited expectations, but realistic expectations to, what their playing time is going to look like, what their role is anticipated being, right? So I think you want, maybe 1 or 2 5-star guys if you can get them. You want maybe 1 or 2, 4-year type of high school guys that you can recruit. And then with the portal, kind of, use it as patchwork, right? Okay, you lost somebody to the portal that you weren't anticipating. You lose your starting small forward to the portal that you weren't anticipated losing. So you go and you plug them in, right? Or like Carolina this offseason, like, trying to go after a big man, losing Armando, and they couldn't replace that with the high school guy. So I think that's probably in an ideal world how you put a team together, but it's obviously easier said than done.
It absolutely is, and that's why some people, like Jim Tanner, get paid the big bucks. That's exactly what we want to talk about next. Carolina has finally added a GM. Its title is GM and Executive Director, modernizing their approach to roster construction. Is it going to help? We'll answer that question in just a second. It's great, again, to be joined by Joe Tipton today on Locked On Tar Heels. Joe, so grateful for your time. Roster construction, Mr. Tipton edits, in my estimation, has been the biggest single issue and hurdle for Carolina this season. So finally, they bring in Jim Tanner to be the GM. They kind of sort of didn't do this last year. They brought in TJ Beisner last year, brought him over from Kentucky, didn't really give him full control, just kind of behind the scenes. That's what was going on. But now it seems like officially, right, this is an official add to the Carolina staff. Does this move the needle for recruits? And ultimately, is it the right call, and is it going to help?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I haven't polled recruits, right? I don't know if recruits know who Jim Tanner is, but that's not to say that he's not important and will be vital to North Carolina, because I think once recruits are informed as to who he is, I think they're going to be pretty impressed, right? I mean, just his resume, speaks for itself, right? 70 NBA players, over $1 billion negotiated in contracts. I mean, guys like Ray Allen, Vince Carter, some even, Tim Duncan, even like former North Carolina stars as well. So I think he will obviously need to be very important for what North Carolina does specifically. I mean, at least in the near future with the portal, right? Helping identify and negotiate. Obviously, probably his number one skill set is, with his past and being an agent for almost 30 years, is to negotiate, right? So now it's kind of it's an interesting space for him to be in, not right now, because once he is recruiting guys in the portal and the staff are recruiting guys in the portal, he is now going to be kind of on the other side of the coin, right? So he's now going to be talking to agents as a former agent. So he knows how to game the game, right? And talk the talk and negotiate these high-level deals. So I think as long as they have, the financial support, right, to go after and get high end talent, which I'm sure they will be. They don't extend Hubert Davis and invest in him, right, or hire Jim Tanner if they're not gonna, invest, in basketball from a financial perspective, like they have football with Bill Belichick, right? So I think he's a great addition. I'm excited to see what he's able to do, and I think it's a very smart hire to go after a GM in Jim Tanner, a guy that's experienced, and I really like the hire.
Yeah. I agree with you, Joe. And reports are from CBS Sports' Matt Norlander. By the way, folks, if you missed that interview, we had Matt Norlander on yesterday. Go check that out. But Matt reported that Carolina is looking to essentially make it into a whole like NBA style front office with bringing in Buzz Peterson. And so while it seems like Carolina was maybe behind on making this GM hire, they might be trying to lead out and saying like, screw it, we're going all in. Here's a whole front office. Does that modeling of the NBA style, I feel like from you talking to other schools, is Carolina leading out in that?
I think so. And I think it's brilliant for them to do it as well, because although, I mean, we're not in amateur athletics anymore. I mean, we got guys agreeing to contracts, to salaries, to millions of dollars, right? Like college basketball is basically professional basketball. You just also go to class. I mean, that's really what it is. And you have to manage it that way. I mean, there's roster turnover year over year. A lot of players are just on, 1-year deals, and then negotiate at the end of the season to either return or leave to another program, right? Or obviously go to the draft for a select handful. But I think it's smart that they're handling it this way in kind of a NBA front office approach. I don't think many programs are looking at it that way, but I think Jim Tanner, I think I read in the press release that he's also going to hire like a director of scouting and a guy, to like help evaluate, guys in the portal. Cause that's the biggest challenge of them all. Like high school guys, you can recruit, evaluate for months, right? You can go to their high school games. The staff can go to their high school games, go to their AAU games. But then like with the transfers, like if you if North Carolina played a mid-major like earlier this season, and then if that kid goes in the portal, then North Carolina have seen them in person, but it's more difficult to evaluate them in the portal, and then it's harder to identify talent, right?
Yeah. Well, to your point earlier about Cade Tyson, right? Like that was a missed evaluation. They got to be able to do that better.
Yeah. So I think that's what they're going to step up and do is hire like I said, a director of scouting or, head of eval for the portal specifically. Cause I do think they're going to, dive deep into that this offseason.
Yeah. Well, and Joe, that in my mind, it takes us back to the anonymous quote you had in your article from an ACC coach. This is the least talented Carolina team we will ever play, was the quote. I'm guessing I can't get you to tell me who that coach was, but like that quote alone, man, I think I texted you this, is like that quote alone has my Twitter mentions a dumpster fire right now, because you tagged me in that post. Thank you. And so I've been sifting through that all week long. But I think there is, a lot of people have debated that. Like, is that true? There's, a lot of people point to the Cole Anthony team, as obviously Cole was very talented, but the rest of that roster was like, oof, I don't know. But the fact that that's even something another rival coach is willing to say tells you about the level that Carolina has to step up. What was the context of that quote? And are you kind of on board with that assessment?
Yeah, I was just having a conversation with a buddy of mine that's an ACC coach, and I basically asked him, look, you've played against them this year. You've seen, how they play, what their roster layout is, who their guards are, who their bigs are. And then I just said, like, what are your thoughts on the team this year? And then that's when he kind of jumped in and said, this is the least talented Carolina team that we will ever play. And it was almost like he said it in a way he knew this wasn't going to happen again. Like we were talking about earlier, like they're not going to miss on all these big men again, right? Like they're going to get an elite, guy on the block this year. So it was almost forward thinking, knowing that he knew North Carolina.
We got to get it while the getting's good kind of situation.
100%.
Yeah. not really. I think a lot of people might take that as like a vindictive thing, but it's really just like they're down and we got to take care of business while they're down.
Yeah. 100%.
So, Joe, I want to ask you about your life a little bit here because we're coming up on portal season. And I'm assuming, I don't know, I've never asked you, but I'm assuming that transfer portal season has become the most bonkers couple of months in your life. Is that an accurate assessment?
Oh yeah, without question.
like just give us a framework every day. How, what is the flood of requests coming into you for edits?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the day. Typically, like once the portal opens, which is on March 24th, already got it on my calendar.
I was gonna say the countdown is on.
Yeah. Like once the portal opens, I am constantly on my phone from sun up to sundown, and even beyond that, right? It's, constantly checking your text or your Twitter DMs or your Instagram DMs or, taking phone calls, right? It's just constant. Thank goodness they shortened the window this year. I remember 2 years ago, it was 60 days.
60.
Then last year it was 45, and then this year it's only 30. Now that might make those 30 days even crazier because it's not spread out. Because what we saw last year was, right, the first week of the portal being open was the most hectic. But then, like the last 3 or 4 days, guys waited to put their name in, like once a bunch of players had already committed. So then they would be, with scarcity and all, they would immediately become some of the top available guys left.
Coleman Hawkins, for example.
Yeah, exactly. He puts his name in left and then demands big money in NIL. So no, it'll be fun, but it'll definitely be pretty crazy at the same time.
Ooh, baby. Well, Joe, you need to go take a nap now and maybe sleep. As this airs, it's Thursday, March 6th. So you got 18 days. Good luck with that. If you need sleeping pills or something else, or no, I guess you need caffeine pills. You don't need the sleeping pills, my guy.
Caffeine, yeah.
Joe, thank you so much for your time. Would you tell everyone where they can find all your great work?
Yeah, you can check me out on on3.com. That's where I write all my articles, or on Instagram and Twitter at Tips and Edits.
Great stuff. As we said earlier, you'll see Joe's edits more than you'll see his face, but it is a glorious face. That's a full beard on your face, my man. I love it. Thank you so much, Joe. Appreciate you, brother.
Absolutely.
Big thanks again to Joe for joining me on today's show. I know his life's about to get absolutely bonkers when the transfer portal opens, and so I'm grateful for him taking some time a couple weeks before that gets started. Go check out all his great work. If you haven't subscribed to the show on video and audio, help us get to that 10,000 mark on YouTube. We're so close, and you can be the very next one to help us get there. If you've not joined the Locked On Tar Heels Discord family, man, we'd love to have you there. That link is in the show notes. Absolutely free to join. You can go next level with Locked On Tar Heels by joining the Insiders program. That link is also in the show notes. You get one-on-one texting access with me and free access to all of my stats and charts and data, records, books, all of that. Free when you join the Locked On Tar Heels Insiders. All right, guys, coming up tomorrow, Coach Rob will join me to get ready for Duke Round 2. Boy, we gotta have it. Also, don't forget to check out today's other episode with our guy, Coach Pat Kilby. It's always a great day to be a Tar Heel. We'll talk again tomorrow, but until then, peace.